Skeletons of the Marital Closet by Tang. Chapter 1821. She suddenly grabbed Gale's shoulder and pushed her away forcefully. Their eyes met. Gale's eyes were swollen from crying. There were only 4 people in the private room. 2 men and 2 women. Since she and Paul were in one room, then Orem and Gale must have. Ivy's eyes widened slowly at the thought. Ivy forgot her own situation. Her heart was filled with shock for Gale. Despite being in the entertainment industry for so long, Ivy had always maintained her purity, never getting involved in scandals, never seducing wealthy men, never accepting any hidden rules. She only gave herself to the one she loved. So, losing her purity was heartbreaking for Ivy. However, her sadness compared to Gale's was completely different. Ivy was single and unmarried. Gale, on the other hand, was married to the most powerful man in Sea City, Shawn. If Gale had a relationship with Orem, then, I'm sorry Ivy, it's my fault. I've implicated you. You could have stayed pure but now. I'm sorry. Gale choked. Besides apologizing, Gale did not know what else to say. What else could she do to Paul? Should she kill him? Gale looked at Paul. Mrs. Wood, Paul smiled. Gale said, before I passed out you were still conscious. You came over to help me. I asked you to call the police, to get help. Did you? Why didn't you listen to me? Paul, you were the only one awake in the room. Mrs. Wood, it's a misunderstanding. Paul immediately began to plead his innocence. Yes, I saw everyone fainting one after another. I was terrified, didn't know who to help first. Just as I was about to take out my phone, my head hurt. When I opened my eyes again, I was here. Ivy was sleeping beside me. Gale gritted her teeth. You came to your senses, so why did you harass Ivy? You beast! Paul hurriedly explained. I was sober, but... He glanced at Ivy, then suddenly stopped talking. Speak up! Tell me! What happened? What's going on? Tell me! Ivy looked at him with hatred. Even if it meant dying, she had to know the truth. She could not let herself lose her purity so blindly. Forget it. Paul scratched his head. I'm afraid you won't be able to handle it. Ivy gritted her teeth. I can handle it, but if you don't speak up, something's fishy. Speak, Gale yelled. Paul hesitated. It's Ivy who made the first move. What? Ivy was extremely agitated, sitting up abruptly. Impossible! You're talking nonsense. It's true. You clung to me, wouldn't let go, rubbed against me, said you were hot, couldn't leave me. I pushed you away, but you came back, even took the initiative to. I don't believe it. Ivy's voice was sharp, piercing the night sky. This is absolutely impossible. How could she be that kind of woman? Why would I lie to you? I saw you being so proactive, and asked you repeatedly if you were willing. You said yes. I'm not a monk, I'm a normal man. Where could I control myself so I... Chapter 1822. Ivy trembled all over, and she felt her mouth clam up. She had actually thrown herself at Paul? It's not your fault, it's not you. Gale held her hand. I know you're not that kind of person, Ivy. It was just the drugs taking effect, controlling your brain and body. Ivy looked at her tearfully. But, if that was what happened to you, then you. She must have experienced the same because they had spent the whole night together. Gale lowered her eyes, her eyelashes trembling. Evie, do you remember what you said to Paul? Do you have any memories at all? She asked. Ivy shook her head. Her mind was blank, and when she woke up, everything had already happened. Everything was set in stone. Me too. I can't remember anything, Gale said. According to Paul, Ivy had clung to him, throwing herself at him unconsciously. So, was Gale doing the same? So it must be true that she and Orem had slept together? At this moment, the last glimmer of hope in her heart turned into nothingness. No matter how much she denied it, she could not accept it. She felt that she and Orem would never do such a thing, but the facts were laid out before her, and she had to just admit it. It's fake. It's all fake. Paul is lying. I don't believe it. Ivy shook her head repeatedly. It's not true. Paul replied. How dare I lie? Mr. Wood is outside. Mr. Lefting is here too. Mrs. Wood is on your side. If I dare to tell half a lie, can I still walk out of this hotel alive today? Mr. Wood! Ivy looked at Gale. Gale did not say anything. she just kept her head down. "Ma'am, Mr. Wood just instructed me to buy a set of clothes for you." The voice of the bodyguard came from the door. Mr. Wood was still so thoughtful. He understood that Ivy should not appear to anyone in her current state. He chose to wait outside, but he did not idly wait. Gale brought the clothes in and glared at Paul. "What are you still doing here?" "I'm leaving right away." Paul nodded and bowed, picked up the clothes from the ground and put them on as he walked out. The room was filled with the smell of smoke. As soon as Paul went out, a miserable cry was heard. "Mr. Wood. Spare me, spare me. Mr. Lefting, please save me, I still have to make movies." Soon, Paul's voice disappeared completely. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the 2 sentences just now were just a figment of Gale and Ivy's imagination. "Put it on." Gale handed Ivy the clothes. She could not think of any comforting words. She herself needed comfort. Ivy took it, her hands still trembling, tears still falling. Gale was considered relatively calm. "Gale." Seeing her like this, Ivy asked very gently, "What about you and Mr. Wood?" Gale did not answer. "You must be very sad, 1,000 times more sad than me, but you're acting calmer than me," Ivy said softly. "How can I be calm? I've just finished crying, I have run out of tears." From the initial grief to the current calm, no one would know what Gale had been through in her heart. No one was her. No one could understand her feelings. One was Shawn, her beloved husband, the person she had spent her whole life with. The other was her best friend Orem, who had helped her throughout her life. She had slept with Orem. Chapter 1823. Just the thought of it was enough to make one feel overwhelmed. Maybe nothing happened between you two. It was because Paul was sober. He wasn't drugged. Both you and Orem were unconscious, so it shouldn't be possible. Now that things aren't clear yet, you... Gale shook her head. "Stop, Ivy." Her mind was a mess and a blur. She did not know if it had happened. She had no memory of it at all. However, the facts were right in front of her. Denying it was difficult. Just because Shawn believed in her, and she believed in her own character, did not mean they could pretend nothing had happened. She could not deceive herself. She also understood that there would always be a thorn in Shawn's heart. This thorn had to be removed, and it could not be left in his heart forever. Otherwise, the wound would only get deeper, then fester, become inflamed, and eventually have to be cut out. First, find out the whole story. With Mr. Wood's power, investigating what happened last night and finding the person behind it shouldn't be difficult. "Don't scare yourself, don't underestimate or belittle yourself," Ivy said. Gale sighed. Ivy comforted her even though she was in such a state. Even when Gale heard Ivy's call, she rushed over to comfort her. This cemented their friendship. "Okay, let's not look down on ourselves," Gale replied. Ivy nodded, biting her lip. She was covered in marks. There were even condoms in the trash. She could not deceive herself. She had truly had sex with Paul. Ivy was beyond redemption now, so her only hope was that Gale had remained pure. When Gale walked out of the room, the sky was already showing a hint of dawn. Last night was over. A new day had begun. However, it was unclear to them if it was ending or beginning. The dim and humid corridor of the hotel emitted a foul, moldy smell. The bodyguards were gone, and no sign of Orem or Paul existed. The only person waiting outside for Gale was Shawn. He looked at her. "Gaily," he called her. Gale stopped a meter away from him. She should have rushed into his arms or held his hand and gone home together. However, she was afraid. Did Gale still have the right to stand by Shawn's side? Did she still deserve it? Seeing Gale standing still, Shawn said, "Gaily, come here." She slowly lifted her foot, hesitated, and then pulled it back. Shawn did not come toward her either. Gale thought he would have taken her hand directly in the past. Did he still care about how she felt? Gale thought that she could not even accept her own filthiness, so why would she hope that Shawn would feel less? She could understand Shawn's feelings. Her heart was pounding painfully, tightening. Gale looked away, unable to look at him. Chapter 1824. "Come here, Gaily. Come," Shawn said. He opened his embrace for her. "I want you to come to me on your own, into my arms." "Just like before, with no difference at all," Shawn said. Gale was taken aback, meeting his gaze. "Like before?" Was everything exactly the same as before with no changes because of last night? Yes. Come Gale, come to me, Shawn replied firmly and directly. It turned out he did not walk over to take her hand because he wanted her to come to him on her own. He was waiting for her. The Gale from before would always joyfully run into his embrace. Gale wanted to go over but hesitated. She felt dirty. Shawn did not speak anymore but maintained his open-armed posture, waiting for her. The two of them stood there in a stalemate. Time passed second by second, and finally Gale could not bear the anguish in her heart any longer. She slowly took steps and walked up to him. While she was still hesitating whether to lean into his embrace, he had already tightly embraced her. "Let's go home," he said solemnly in her ear. A lump formed in Gale's throat. With great difficulty she managed to squeeze out a word. "Okay." He hugged her tightly, letting her lean against his chest, and turned to go downstairs, leaving this rundown place. Oh, this godforsaken place. The vehicle was waiting at the door. As soon as the driver saw Shawn and Gale, he immediately stepped forward and opened the rear door. Before leaving, Shawn looked back. This motel would soon cease to exist. It would disappear from Sea City forever. How could he allow a place that hurt him and Gale so deeply to remain unscathed? Of course, it had to be destroyed. Gale leaned quietly in his arms, not saying a word. He felt that her lean was no longer as intimate as before. A heavy sense of estrangement passed through his eyes. 5 minutes later, Ivy came downstairs. She wrapped herself tightly, leaving only her eyes exposed. As she was about to leave, she suddenly heard a commotion of footsteps. Dozens of bodyguards entered in a black mass. Ivy stepped aside to hide. "Why are you back again?" the boss stuttered. "Did they not all leave? What happened in his motel? Why were so many things happening overnight, like a movie? He was just running a small business, trying to make a living." The captain in charge waved his hand. "Demolish it." What? The boss exclaimed in shock. You can't demolish it. This is my building. The Wood Group has requisitioned this entire area, including your building. How much money do you want? Go to the Wood Group's finance department and talk to the director, the captain said. The boss stood there dumbfounded, unable to react. Ivy listened silently, lowered her hat, and walked out of the motel. Shawn was still protecting his wife. The man had just left but had already arranged for demolition. Chapter 1825. There would be no traces of this place very soon. That was all well. For Ivy, this place would forever be a reminder of her nightmare. Soon, this place would be demolished and rebuilt. The place in her memory would cease to exist. She walked with her head down briskly, arms folded around herself, rubbing her arms incessantly. Suddenly, someone blocked her path. She saw a pair of shiny leather shoes. "Ivy." She hesitated, lifting her head to face the man in front of her. It was Orem. Before last night, Ivy had a slight admiration for Orem. She fantasized that perhaps with time, they would grow fond of each other, appreciating each other more. However, Ivy knew that she was not worthy of Orem anymore. Orem looked at her, a hint of reluctance in his eyes. "You and Paul." Ivy trembled, instinctively stepping back, pressing herself against the wall. "I don't want to hear that name." "Then, are you still planning to participate in this film?" he inquired. She bit her lip, silent. Of course she wanted to act. Good script, good director, big production, resources that many actresses would vie for, now in her hands. However, how could she act? Ivy felt disgusted at the thought of Paul. How could she have relations with a man she did not even like? "Go ahead, only you can take on this role." "I'll double your pay," Orem said. Ivy shook her head. "It's not about the pay. I understand. Last night," Orem did finish. Both he and Ivy understood. "Orem, I did have relations with Paul. But you and Gale, did you?" Ivy, who had been looking down, suddenly met his gaze. "What do you think?" "Unlikely, because both of you were unconscious. It shouldn't have happened." "You also lost consciousness," Orem replied. "But Paul didn't. He was perfectly sober." "He was just knocked out," Ivy retorted. A trace of impatience flickered in Orem's eyes. Why did Ivy have to doubt? "He said it happened." "So it happened." Ivy was lost in her thoughts, not noticing Orem's gaze. She continued, "The three of us met in the lobby. You didn't touch anything on the table, just drank tea instead of alcohol. Was the tea the problem? We spent a short time in the private room and didn't touch anything inside. You started feeling dizzy first, then Gale, then me. Paul was perfectly fine, so the room should be fine. Orem suddenly interrupted her. Let me take you home. Take me? Ivy was still a little dazed. Yes. Orem nodded. Come to think of it, you were just dragged into the mess. Although I haven't started investigating what happened last night, I'm sure Gale and I were the targets. You're innocent. Gale told me the same thing. I feel guilty. Orem pursed his lips. Originally, you could have stayed out of it. Ivy, you're a good girl. His tone was full of regret and compassion. Ivy's eyes suddenly became teary again. Chapter 1826. Ivy could endure all the pain by herself, but she could not bring herself to terms with Orem's kindness. There might have been a future between them, but it felt impossible given what had happened. She fantasized that perhaps Orem's regretful gaze stemmed from his belief that she was no longer pure. Ivy took a deep breath. I don't blame you or Gale. I only hate the person behind all this manipulation, and even more, Paul! Paul was clearly sober, yet he claimed she had seduced him, unable to resist. Was that not just an excuse he came up with? He could have called the police, left, or taken her to the hospital. There were so many options, yet he chose to have sex with her. It's already happened. We can't change it. We can only accept reality. Ivy, I hope we can still be friends. I don't look down on you. You're a victim, and I will find out the truth and help you get justice. I'll handle Paul. You can ignore him. Just focus on playing your role. He lifted his hand, gently resting it on her shoulder. Let's go. I'll take you home. Ivy did not refuse. She was extremely fragile right now, and Orem's words warmed her heart. Orem really was a good person. You still took the time to care about me. Ivy followed quietly behind him, heading toward the car. Orem, you must be a mess now too. What are you feeling? Ivy thought he must have felt very guilty. He was friends with Gale, yet he did this. How could they continue being friends? Orem did not answer. Ivy thought he must be feeling heavy-hearted, but she did not see the slight smile playing on Orem's lips. In Temperley Hall, Shawn hugged Gale as they were about to enter the hallway, coincidentally running into Joshua and Nicole, who were getting ready to go to kindergarten. Hey, Mommy! Nicole ran over quickly when she saw them. Why are your eyes all red? Joshua noticed too. Daddy! Did you bully her? He immediately questioned. Gale forced a smile. Shawn felt her stiffen in his embrace. Nope, I didn't sleep all night and felt a bit under the weather, so my eyes turned like this. Just need some rest. She tried to keep her voice light. Nicole tilted her head. All night? Mommy, what were you guys doing? Yeah. Joshua also looked puzzled. I remember last night. Before he could finish, Gale interrupted him. Your dad and I went to the mountaintop to stargaze. It was very romantic. You guys shouldn't be so nosy, she said. Nicole's face showed a mix of surprise and envy. Wow. Stargazing is so romantic, Joshua muttered. So Daddy went out last night to take you stargazing. Hold on. His eyes widened. Was it with a telescope? You shouldn't have left me behind if you went to the observatory. Could it be that Daddy also wants to name a star after Mommy? Joshua grew more anxious. You promised me first. I share your last name. I'm your son. Mommy is your wife, but she doesn't have the same last name as you. Do it for me first before Mommy. First come, first served. We'll go in order. I'm first. Seeing Joshua's earnest and anxious expression, Gale wanted to laugh. However, deep down, her heart was bitter. Chapter 1827. What a good child, what a harmonious family. It seemed like she was about to lose it all. Gale felt ashamed to face Joshua and Nicole. Gale nodded. You pick first. I'll give you whatever star you want, okay? Joshua breathed a sigh of relief. His passion for astronomy, aviation and the universe was ingrained in his bones. Last weekend, Lucas took him to the space station, where he saw astronauts. They even took a photo together, which he framed and put on his bedside table. He treated it as his treasure, and looked at it every day when he woke up and before he went to bed. When the servants came to clean, he would not let them touch it. He wiped it gently by himself. Let me have it first, I'm younger. Mommy, you have everything already, You don't need to name a plain old star. Besides, what's mine is yours, right? She had everything? Yes, she used to think so too, but now she feels differently. She had been robbed of something important to her. Gale suppressed her thoughts, unwilling to show any sadness in front of her children. Yeah. Gale squatted down, patting Joshua's head. Go to kindergarten now. She straightened Nicole's uniform collar. Listen to your teacher, okay? Be a good girl. Mommy, when was I ever not good? Well, Nicole is the best and most obedient. Gale kissed Nicole's cheek, held her hand, held Joshua's hand with the other, and personally put them in the car. Bye-bye. Study hard. She waved. Joshua blinked. Mommy, you seem a bit off. What? No, I just had a late night. I'm not feeling great, Gale said. Joshua looked at her carefully again. Was everything really okay? Was he just overthinking? Why did he feel weird? Gale maintained a faint smile, determined not to let Joshua see anything. The car drove out, and Gale stood still, staring blankly ahead. The wind blew, and she felt the dryness in her already sore eyes. She blinked quickly a few times, only to find tears streaming down her face again. Gale. Shawn stood behind her. I'm a bit tired. I want to go to bed. She wiped her eyes. Okay. Gale quickly turned around and went straight into the bathroom, locked the door, and shut herself in. The sound of the shower kept on, never stopping. Shawn stood outside the bathroom door waiting quietly. He was there. He had always been there. He wanted to be the first person she saw when she came out. Shawn understood all of Gale's emotions and embraced her. He even blamed himself. Why had he not protected her? If he had been a little more attentive and arranged a few more bodyguards to follow her, this would not have happened. He would not have given anyone a chance to act. Perhaps Shawn had underestimated Orem too much. Chapter 1828. He had clearly underestimated Orem too much, which led to this series of events. Gale stood under the shower. The warm water washed over her body as she closed her eyes, tilting her head back, letting the water cleanse her from head to toe, over and over again. As her hair stuck to her shoulders and face, Gale felt so dirty. She scrubbed her skin vigorously, rubbing it until it turned red and sore, almost washing away her skin. Her skin was wrinkled and swollen from being in the water for too long, but still, she did not stop. She felt it was not enough. She was not clean enough. Outside the door, Shawn checked the time. Gale had been in there for an hour already. He knocked on the door with his fingers. Gale. No response. He knocked harder. Gale! Answer me! The sound of rushing water accompanied Gale's voice. I'm still showering. You've been in there long enough. Not enough. Enough, Shawn's voice rose. Come out, or I'm coming in. Gale fell silent again. Shawn could not wait for another second. He broke down the door. The bathroom was filled with hot and misty steam. Gale stood there, her fair skin scrubbed raw with red streaks. Shawn walked quickly over and turned off the shower. The sound of water stopped abruptly. What are you doing? Gale looked up at him. I'm not finished yet. It's been an hour. How much cleaner do you need to be? I need to do this until I'm clean. Shawn's face darkened, but he did not speak. He grabbed a towel and wrapped it around her, and looked like he was about to lift her up. No, don't. Gale struggled to avoid him. Shawn, let me shower a bit longer, just a little longer. I'm still not clean. Let go of me. As she spoke, she turned the shower back on. The water soaked the towel wrapped around her. Shawn's clothes were drenched too. Gale, how long are you going to torture yourself like this? How long are you going to punish yourself? Shawn shouted. His voice was angry and deep, but more than anything, it was filled with pain. She hurt as he hurt. If she was sad, he was even sadder. It was not her fault. She should not have become like this. The ones at fault were Orem, Paul, and himself, as the neglectful husband. Through the steam, Gale looked at him. She said, Don't mind me, I'll shower as long as I want. You're all wet. Go out and change your clothes, don't catch a cold. The water continued to pour over both of them. Shawn's eyes were red too. Tears blended with shower water. It was hard to tell which was which. Chapter 1829. Do you know what you're doing? How much does it hurt me? Shawn said with a tinge of sorrow in his voice. Gale's body trembled. Gale, stop punishing yourself like this. Stop abusing your body. It pains me to see you like this. I don't want you to continue like this, he said. She turned away. What you're doing is pointless. It won't help at all. What you and I need to do is find the person behind this, find the truth, find evidence, and not punish yourself, Shawn said. Gale murmured. Truth? What is the truth? Even if everything comes to light, what happened between me and Orem is a fact, something that can't be changed. Even if it's a fact, so what? Gale, I won't blame you, I don't care. But I do. I can't face you. I'm not worthy of you. I have no right to stay by your side, she shouted. Seeing Joshua and Nicole, Gale felt even sadder. Their faces gleamed with innocence. They did not know what had happened. So much could change in just one night. A tear in their parents' relationship had formed, a fatal one. Shawn lifted his hand, gripping Gale's shoulder tightly. Listen to me, Gale. What happened between you and Orem may not necessarily be true. Without evidence, without surveillance footage, no one can draw that conclusion. Not even Orem himself. Gale looked at him desperately. You're still comforting me. Are you still deluding yourself? When you entered the room, what did you see? You know better than I do. She was not awake at the time, but he saw it all. All I saw was you and Orem lying together. Nothing else, Shawn replied. Isn't that enough? Perhaps you were just lying together? Gale closed her eyes, shaking her head repeatedly. Don't lie to me and don't lie to yourself. I'm sorry, Shawn, it's my fault. I can't accept myself now. And I think you can't either, otherwise we… Gale. Realizing what Gale was about to say next, Shawn quickly raised his voice, sternly interrupting her. Gale looked at him. Don't say it, don't you dare say it. Never say those two words. Do you hear me? Shawn's voice grew even harsher. She just looked at him quietly, the sadness in her eyes so evident. Shawn no longer indulged her. He felt he had to be a bit tougher. He turned off the shower again, wrapped her in a towel, ignoring her struggles, and carried her out of the bathroom, laying her on the big bed. Gale lay curled up on her side, her gaze dull and vacant. Shawn did not say a word, silently drying her hair and helping her into her pajamas. He looked down at her fingers swollen from the prolonged showering, gently caressed them, and then kissed them. Gale trembled slightly, watching his lips touch her fingers. She could still clearly see Shawn's eyelashes, eyebrows, his nose. He was still the same as always. Unfortunately, she was not. Gale tried to pull her fingers back, but Shawn held them tightly. The more she struggled, the tighter he held on. She could not match Shawn's strength. Gale, you can't have any other bad thoughts, not even the slightest. Understand? Shawn said. Gale did not utter a word. Even if you do, I'll crush them myself. Shawn stared into her eyes, resolute. Gale was not resolute. Her hair hung limp by her ears, warm from the blow-dryer. As Gale lowered her head, the strands of hair slid past her shoulders. Chapter 1830. Shawn. Yeah, I'm here, he replied immediately as she spoke. Don't you despise me? Not even a little, Gale asked. How could I despise you, Gale? But I despise myself. Shawn sighed, reaching out to embrace her, but she resisted, pressing against his chest, unwilling to be intimate with him. Shawn, I feel dirty. Even after showering, even after I've changed and I'm technically all clean from head to toe, I still feel an invisible dirt, Gale said. Her eyes moistened slightly. She blinked quickly, retracting the tears. She lifted her head, locking eyes with Shawn. I know what you're thinking. You don't blame me, and you think it's not my fault. I also know. I'm not at fault, I'm the victim, but I can't change what has happened. Shawn, I'm not worthy of you, and I've let down this marriage. This matter will become the deepest thorn in both our hearts. Even if you don't mention it, I don't think about it, but it will always be there, the elephant in the room. You're so good, really good, so good that I feel like I'm the happiest woman in the world without exception, Gale said, smiling. You're going to have to throw me a wedding. Even though you haven't told me the details, I know it will be the most luxurious, extravagant wedding in Sea City. What you give me is always the best. We're still going to watch the stars together. You picked a star and named it after us. How wonderful. Thinking of it made her happy, but she felt unworthy of it all now. Shawn panicked. Gale! Stop it, don't have any other thoughts, just stay by my side. I'll handle everything, understand? When she cried, he did not panic, he just felt heartache. When she kept washing herself in the bathroom, he did not panic, he just felt uncomfortable. However, panic flooded Shawn's entire body. Gale's words reminded him of the past. How will you handle it? Are you going to shoot Orem? If he dies, does it mean none of this ever happened? Gale asked. Shawn Orem is also a victim. We're not at fault. The one at fault is the mastermind behind all this. With that, Gale reached up, stroking Shawn's face. We can't get past this, so, let's get a divorce. In the end, she uttered those words, even though Shawn had just stopped her and warned her. Shawn's gaze gradually grew dark upon the mention of divorce. Gale, retract what you just said. I'll pretend I didn't hear it, Shawn spoke up. She still stubbornly repeated, let's divorce Shawn. With such a thing happening, how could she stay by his side? How could she return to the way things were? Gale only ever had Shawn in her life. She would not allow any other man to touch even a finger of hers. She never expected that her body would be given to Orem. What could she do to Orem? What could Shawn do to Orem? Moreover, Orem was unconscious. Gale, do you even know what you're saying?